The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will start shortly.
Order, order, and welcome Prime Minister to this session of the Liaison Committee. There's one or two things I need to say at the beginning about what we can talk about and not talk about. As colleagues know, I'm on the Privileges Committee, and the colleagues will be aware that the House has referred the question of whether or not the Prime Minister's answer about the events in Number 10 and the Cabinet Office during lockdown amounted to misleading the House. The House referred that to the Privileges Committee. Just as we would not refer to something which was sub judice, it would be wrong to go into detail about a matter which the House has referred elsewhere for examination. And I very much wanted colleagues and the Prime Minister and the public to understand that we have to operate under that constraint. And I remind colleagues that the Speaker and his deputies have pulled people up about this in the Chamber. We should not be undermining the process the House itself has set in place. There is, of course, no difficulty in raising any other matter. And the Prime Minister, I have no wish to constrain anything that you wish to say in this committee, but I will have to pull you up if you stray into the Privileges Committee remit. Thank you. Prime Minister, it is our intention to start with the great issues facing the nation and to move to the question of integrity in politics and related matters towards the end of the session. Unless you wanted to dispose of those matters immediately first.
I'll be subverted to your committee. I'll be guided.
Right, very good. I'm afraid I will pull you up if your answers are pressing on time, so that we can deal with that latter topic fully and properly at the end. And if your answers are too long, I'm afraid we will just detain you until we have completed our business. So every incentive for you to be as crisp as possible, and that goes for the questions as well, colleagues. We will start on the topic of Ukraine with the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee.
The alliance that has been brought together to dissuade Russia from further actions and indeed to push Russia out of Donetsk and Luhansk has clearly got a window of opportunity before the winter starts to bite and the coalition starts to fracture as energy prices in Europe rise and homes across our country start to suffer. Are you able to concentrate on building that alliance at the moment?
Yes, and thanks, Tom. If you look at what the UK has done over the last couple of weeks, I think that the efforts of UK diplomacy, UK strategists, security, armed forces have been very considerable, and G7 outcomes were at the upper end of expectations. NATO certainly, again, probably both exceeded expectations in the level of unity, and virtually every country around the table in NATO determined to help President Zelensky in that window of opportunity that you described.
And you're seeing, of course, food prices rise around the world as the ports of Odessa are closed, Mariupol and so on occupied. What are you doing to make sure that the food is getting out from the Black Sea, that such wheat as is available is able to get out? How are you supporting the United Nations? And what are you doing to prepare those states, including the Middle East and, of course, in Africa, who are facing enormous food poverty and the possibility of migration and the pressures that that will cause?
So, first of all, on the grain that's being held hostage in Odessa, we're working with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who's leading the negotiations. The Turks are clearly crucial. They hold the waters. What the UK is offering is both demining capabilities, including remote demining capabilities, which we're good at, and the insurance of the vessels that might be used to ferry the grain out through the Bosphorus. We're also, because we're looking at other routes in addition to convoys through the Bosphorus, we're also doing what we can to help smaller packets of grain go through land routes or indeed up the river, Danube, and out that way. And we're spending some money on upgrading the railways to that end. And you're starting to see some growing quantities of grain coming out, not via the Black Sea, but overland and on the rivers.
Now we're seeing, as you know, we're seeing enormous pressure on the weaponry that goes into Ukraine. We're seeing a lot of promises and sadly from many countries fewer deliveries than promised. What are you doing to increase the production and cooperation between armaments companies around Europe and around the United States and Canada to increase the supply?
The UK led the way in inaugurating the Ramstein conferences, which have brought countries together to supply weaponry to Ukraine, and though the Americans are now very much in the lead on that and are certainly providing the bulk of what's going in. And we'll be doing more in August as the Copenhagen conference, as I'm sure you know, another military donor conference. There is the supplies continue to go in. The Ukrainians are steadily getting the kind of kit that they need if they're going to expel the Russians from where they are. But it's also very important that they are trained to use the MLRS, the multi-launch rocket systems, effectively, so that very expensive weaponry is put to good use.
Now, your Foreign Secretary, forgive me, has explained that victory in Ukraine means taking back every single square inch of Ukrainian soil, including Crimea. What's your view of victory?
We can't be more Ukrainian than the Ukrainians. That's for them to decide. President Zelensky has set out his ambitions. It will ultimately be for him to decide what the terms that he wants. But he's been very clear that he would like to return at least to the status quo ante February the 24th.
And so what is your view of what victory for us should look like?
I think I think the victory for the Ukrainians would be a result that the Ukrainian people feel is the right one. And at the moment, I think I'm right in saying that 90% or more of Ukrainians believe passionately that there should be no deal that involves land for peace, and they want the Russians expelled from every part of the territory that Putin has invaded.
Are you confident of holding the NATO agreement together, or rather the European and American agreement together, in making sure that coalition sustains the Ukrainians even when the winter prices start to bite?
I think what was notable at Madrid was how anxieties about the friability of the coalition were proved to be unfounded. And that's because the logic of the situation simply demands international unity. There's no other solution. There's no deal on offer. Even if the Ukrainians wanted to do a deal of land for peace, Putin isn't offering any such deal. He still remains utterly maximalist in his objectives. And that's why we have to continue to support Zelensky in the way that we are. And that's accepted around the table.
And part of your commitment to sustaining Ukrainian operations and indeed wider British military operations, your increase to 2.5%, given that the various international organisations and indeed our own statistical agencies do not foresee any growth in the UK economy in the coming years. Who are you going to take the money off in order to increase the defence budget?
I'm not certain I agree with your premise about the growth of the UK economy in the coming years. I think if you look at both, I'm sure we'll come to this in NATO sections, but in both the IMF and the OECD see us going back to at or near the top of the growth league. But
I think percentage rather than absolute.
Yeah, sure. But the 2.5 is a logic. It's just a prediction. It's based on the, I think, reasonable assumption that we are going to have to continue with the investments that we're making in the Future Combat Aircraft System and the AUKUS agreements with the Australians and the Americans. These are very big projects, and they'll be expensive, but they're the right things for the country.
And so the last question from me will be on Sweden and Finland. Clearly, their membership of NATO is an extremely important event, not just for them, but for all of us. What are the implications for the guarding of the High North, and particularly the integrity of the United Kingdom and Scotland as part of that in the alliance? And what are the commitments that the UK is willing to make to increase cooperation with Sweden and Finland, not just in military supplies, but also in training?
Yeah, well, thank you. We already do a lot of cooperating with the Joint Expeditionary Force. The JEF, as you know, is up there in the High North. The addition of Finland and Sweden is a great moment for the alliance. I think it will strengthen the alliance, and it tells you all you need to know about Putin and his aggression at countries as peaceable as Sweden and Finland have decided to join NATO.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, good to see you again. We're establishing that the world is getting more dangerous. The next decade is going to be very bumpy indeed. I want to focus on UK defence capabilities. Despite the injection of £24 billion, the integrated view has seen a tilt towards cyber and space, which is welcome, but it's come at the expense of cuts to all three conventional services. At your last appearance here, prior to the Russian invasion, you boldly stated that tanks are not the answer to the defence of Ukraine, that the old concepts of tank battles on the European landmass are over. Prime Minister, do you now recognise the value of tanks as part of our landfall warfare mix, and plans to reduce our tank numbers now need to be reviewed?
Thank you very much, Tobias. I think that when you certainly, I think that it's important for the UK to have tanks, but I think for the Ukrainian purposes, even more valuable were anti-tank weapons. And if you look at what really changed the course of the first few weeks of the war, it was the javelins, it was the NLAWs in particular, and the javelins that were used to destroy the tanks and ready to make Russia's tank warfare extremely difficult. And you'll have seen exactly what happened.
That's understood, and I don't disagree with that. What I'm trying to stress at is that the defence budget, it will actually go down by £1 billion in 2023-24, according to library figures. And you mentioned NLAWs. We have stockpiles which are being depleted. We're short of deep fire capabilities, rocket artillery, air defence, and indeed hypersonics as well. This is where the character of conflict is moving. We need to invest more, including in those tanks, which we're cutting by a third, and indeed our warrior fighting vehicles. We have no capability to do dismounted infantry because we're actually cutting the entire warrior fleet. Could I beg with the Prime Minister to reconsider the army numbers? If there's one thing he could take away from here, with his new Chancellor, to look at securing £40 million required to reverse the cuts in our army manpower.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to stress that we value immensely the armed forces, in the sense we value the numbers of troops. If you include the reserves, there are in fact over 100,000, so 73,000 in the regular army plus 30,000 reserves. But I think it's also very important that, I heard all the points that people like General Sanders have made, but the important thing is to have the best possible equipment for those troops, and that's what we're doing.
Well, let's look at that equipment, because in the army, I just said, we're losing a third of our tanks. We're losing our warrior fighting vehicles. We're decimating our tracked land warfare capability. In the RAF, we're down from 36 squadrons during the Gulf War to just 6 today. We're losing all our Hercules heavy lift. We're losing, we only have 48 of the 138 F-35s. We're losing 2 of the E-7 I-Star aircraft that are so critical to work with the F-35s. And in the Navy, in 1990s, during the Cold War, we had 13 destroyers, 35 frigates, and now we're down to just 18. We are hollowing out all our armed services at the very time that, as you mentioned, the head of the army is saying we face in 1937 moment. This is the time to be investing in our armed forces, not depleting our capability.
Well, I agree with that, but that's why we're spending 24 billion over the next 4 years. It's the biggest increase since the end of the Cold War, and I think that money is being wisely spent.
It's been spent already. It's gone.
Well, it's over the next 4 years.
Yeah, it's gone in to invest into paying for the replacement of the Vanguard submarines. The money didn't even hit the sides. That's where it was needed to make sure that program allowed us to continue our nuclear deterrent.
I understand, but we're also committed, as I said earlier on, to a number of massive projects. You mentioned heavy lift aircraft. Actually, if you look at what the UK has, I think we're still by far the biggest possessor of heavy lift aircraft in Europe. On ships, where we've got a very active shipbuilding program. Tobias, I take your point about tanks again, humbly and sincerely, and I will take it away and look at it and look at the armored personnel carriers, the armored vehicles. They have been useful to the Ukrainians, particularly the armored vehicles. But the committee should be in no doubt. We're investing massively in defence.
I hear what you say, but I mean, you're a classicist. Your responses to date make me feel like Homer's Cassandra. I say to you, we must prepare for the storm clouds that are coming over the horizon, and you don't seem to believe me. I say we can't afford these troop cuts in our army numbers, but you don't believe me. And I say that we need to reverse these cuts in our land warfare systems, our ships, and indeed our planes, and you still don't believe me. And there is a change afoot. We are our history and a turning point in our history, and we need to prepare for what is coming over the horizon. Britain must play its part. There is a gap in leadership in Europe, and I want Britain to assume that role. We can only do so if we prepare today and advance our defence posture.
I really think you should have been at NATO to listen.
I wasn't invited, sir.
One day. To listen to what the other countries say about the UK contribution and the indispensability of UK armed forces, our contribution to NATO's new force model, the role that we play. We're the second biggest spender in NATO, but a massive contributor to all the joint operations. And I think Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General, would testify that. And when you say, I don't believe, that's not true. I do understand the need for more spending on defence. It has to be balanced against other priorities, and it is going up.
Then reverse those troop numbers.
Okay. Can I just press one matter related to this? We have given away our training stocks of NLAW, of MLRS, and other munitions to the Ukrainians. What are we doing to galvanize the supply chain back to a wartime capability that will provide resilience of stocks? Because at the moment, we simply can't replace those stocks.
Well, thank you. But actually, if you look at what's happening in Belfast, they are making a lot of endless.
They're not replacing as fast as we're giving them away. That is a fact.
That is true. They take a while to make, but we're replacing them.
But I mean, this goes to the heart of the integrated review, which was very good on analysis and requirement, but there are only 2 pages on the implementation. What are we going to do to make sure that we implement the defence integrated review so that we actually have the capability ready when we need it? Because at the moment we don't.
We're supplying a huge amount of capability. I accept the view that we need to modernise and do more, and more NLAWs are certainly rolling off the production line at Thales. I think it's Thales in Belfast.
Is it time to quickly? Is it time to review aspects of the integrated review?
I think the integrated review has stood the test of time well. And,
We're going to move on.
And I'm happy to take it up later.
Angus McNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Prime Minister, about 4 years ago just now, I was comparing your predecessor to Gloria Gaynor, because she will survive. At that very moment, there was perhaps a young Lochidvar type making his resignation statement in the House of Commons at that moment. Can you remember who that was?
Mr. McNeill, you have to.
It was yourself, Prime Minister. I was just checking that. You're a bit of a trendsetter in that regard.
Yes.
But it seems from the rumours I'm hearing from Conservative MPs that you're beyond Gloria Gaynor. You're more the Paul Young, and you want to tear the playhouse down. And the warning they're getting is, if it's a sure destruction of the Prime Minister, you might make it mutual. You might call a general election of a cull of Tory MPs, something, of course, that'd be very welcome in many sides. But the point of clarification and disagreement that some of us have had in light of powers being taken away from the Fixed Term Parliament Act, do you need the permission of the Queen, or do you just need to inform the Queen to hold an election?
I really don't think that anybody in this country wants politicians to be engaged in electioneering now or in the immediate future. And I think that we need to get on with serving our voters and dealing with the issues that they care about.
So your nervy backbenchers are okay. Interestingly, we've had some difficulty in the International Trade Committee with CRAG and the triggering of the process to bring about this, and you get a note about this in Parliament. We look for an extension of CRAG. But I also want to put it to you, Prime Minister, Brexit is a 5% damage to GDP. And these trade agreements you're signing up to are a minor part. I mean, they're 0.08% of GDP. It's equivalent to going out and losing £500 and coming back with £8 or £2, it could be in the case of New Zealand, and thinking you've done well. Is the Brexit process and the trade agreement process good for the economy, given what your own figures are saying?
Yes, I think that they are. And
so if you lose £500 and come back with £8, you'll tell us all you're having a good day.
It was the ability to set our own medicines policy that enabled us to come out of the to vaccinate everybody.
Every country's done that. Come on. And the death rates have been. We can trade that. I'm asking you a specific economic question.
Fair-minded people.
What about 5%?
Order.
Order.
Prime Minister.
Thank you. Prime Minister, can you answer
Prime Minister.
Can you answer the question?
Yes. So to your point, Mr. McNeill, about the economic benefits, just one. In addition to the free ports, free trade deals, the ability to vary regulation, or all the rest of it, I would point out that by being able to vaccinate faster than a lot of other, I think virtually every other European country,
Mr. McNeill,
able to come out of lockdown, which was a considerable
it's an economic
benefit.
question, not a vaccines question.
Mr. McNeill.
But I don't want to answer the
carry on.
because time is short. Thank you. If you can't see the difference between £500 take away £8 and note that he's out of pocket, we have to leave that there, and the public can make up their own mind about the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, something else that's concerning many of my constituents is EGNOS. You might not know that it's a European geostationary navigational overlay system. It's a 3D system for aircraft in the air. The UK is the only G20 country without such a facility. It's affecting the training of pilots as well. Will you get the UK back into EGNOS quickly, or have an equivalent 3G navigation system there in place soon? It's required.
Well, thank you. That is a very interesting suggestion. I'll happily look at that. We do have a pioneering low Earth orbit system of satellites called OneWeb, as I'm sure you know. But
it's of no use to aircraft at the moment.
I don't know whether that's of any use.
No.
Perhaps you'll write to us on that matter.
Yeah, thank you. Prime Minister, you're a fan of imperial system. You want to have imperial measures.
Well, I think. Well, if people want to have them, I don't think that.
And how easy is the system? I mean, how many ounces are in a pound?
No, I'm not going to. I'm afraid I was brought up in the.
So you don't know how many ounces are in a pound? The basics of the imperial system.
I think there are 16 ounces.
Mr. McNeill, we can't hear either of you what you're saying.
16 ounces to a pound.
16 ounces.
16 ounces to a pound.
I would tax you with pounds in a stone then.
But I've got to make a confession. I was educated all over the place, and I can do metric as well.
So the Prime Minister of the UK is more adept in the metric system. Excellent.
I can tell you what I think of my weight in stone. How about that?
Okay, thank you very much. And probably put your mind at rest. I mean, I've heard mention of Sweden, Finland, and Scotland. I've no questions to ask about independence of Scotland. It's not a matter for you. It's a matter for the people of Scotland. Yep. It will be decided in Scotland. And I think, Prime Minister, that's about all that we need to discuss at the moment. Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McNeill. Sir Robert Goodwill, DEFRA.
I'd like to bring us back to the topic of food security, both globally and nationally. Globally, it's a matter of whether people eat or starve. Nationally, it's having a major impact on the cost of living crisis. And I wonder if we are underestimating the ease at which we can actually bring wheat supplies and sunflower supplies out of Ukraine, given the change of gauge of the railway lines into Poland, given the way that loading equipment in Odessa could be damaged by missiles. Is it really only realistic possibility if there were a ceasefire, and as long as conflict's going on, is there really a possibility we can get those supplies out?
Well, so what's actually, what's happening is that the monthly consignments of grain out of Odessa are starting to go up. It should be about 5 million tons a month. I think that it's the most recent figures I saw for June, I think it was running about 2.75 million tons. So it's not nothing. You can get it out not just by the sea, as I was saying earlier on, but by land routes as well. I think if the risk is I think what the Ukrainians are worried about is that if they negotiate a deal with Putin to get him to open up the Black Sea, he will demand the lifting of sanctions in an unacceptable way.
Coming close to home, the government published its food strategy a couple of weeks ago, which I think was widely welcomed. One aspect of that was having more food from our own resources. We're self-sufficient in liquid milk, but about 75% of the food that we can produce here, climatically, is produced here. Do you think, given the global situation, we should revisit things like rewilding, putting solar farms on arable land, or planting of trees, and we should concentrate on improving food production here at home?
I share that enthusiasm, and the food strategy that we launched a few weeks ago certainly puts our own domestic production at the heart of what we're trying to do. We have, I think, 74% self-sufficiency, but there's a massive opportunity. It affects our balance of trade. Personally, I would like to see many more solar panels on roofs than in what could be otherwise productive fields, and I think we need to think sometimes about the fiscal incentives that we offer.
Thank you. And finally, one of the key inputs into agriculture in our country is nitrogen fertilizer. We have one plant now operating at Billingham. The plant at Ince in Cheshire has been closed, and I think the owners are looking for buyers. Is the government aware of what it can do to try and get that plant operational again? Is there any assistance that might be available to possible buyers? Because we'll be once again reliant on imports of a product which internationally is in very short supply.
Yeah, so thank you. Look, this is a massive issue for farmers. We're not sufficiently self-reliant in fertilizer. We've had the fertilizer roundtable recently and tried to see what we can do to help, trying to get alternatives, but clearly that's doesn't always work, not as effective. We need to make much more fertilizer domestic. I have to say one of the reasons why the global south is suffering so much at the moment is also shortage of fertilizer, and there are far too few African fertilizer plants. So we should be doing what we can to help build fertilizer resilience around the world. They are really feeling it right now.
So have there been any conversations with prospective buyers of the plant in Cheshire, do you know?
I can't tell you about prospective buyers of that plant, but we're certainly concerned about there is a single plant left, as you say, and that makes us that puts a lot of pressure on that plant.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Elwood, you wanted to catch my eye very briefly for a one-liner?
On the Ukraine grain, we recognise, thank you, Chair, we recognise the importance of getting grain out of Ukraine. It's ground zero when it comes to feeding not just Europe, but also Africa. Could I invite the Prime Minister? I think there's an opportunity for British leadership to take this to the UN General Assembly. It's something I've raised with you before, sir.
Yes.
And to see whether we can get those 2/3 votes to turn the port into humanitarian safe haven that will then allow or facilitate the starting point of getting that grain out in those ships. It's the ships that we need to get out. That's the scale of exports that are required if we're to affect the cost of the crisis here.
Prime Minister, that was a long one.
So thank you. I don't disagree at all. The question is could you get the Russians to do it? And sadly, as you know, Tobias, even in the UN General Assembly, although we got a great vote for the initial condemnation of the invasion, Russia and China are very influential.
Dame Diana, Home Affairs.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. A few weeks ago, I met a group of Ukrainian MPs who had travelled to the UK via the Republic of Ireland. Like every other country, the Republic of Ireland in Europe doesn't require a visa. They then travelled up through the common travel area. They didn't have anything checked. And they were raising with me whether it was a sensible decision to allow such a bureaucratic visa system for Ukrainians fleeing Ukraine. Was a sensible use of resources and, as we know, has compromised the capacity of the Home Office. What do you say to that?
I hear you loud and clear, Diana. I think that the argument that's been put to me is two things. First of all, we've got to be careful that we are able to screen people properly. And
but these people coming up through the common travel area, there's no screening.
I accept that, and I accept the limitations of screening. But on the other hand, you've got to look at what we've done so far. 135,000 visas have been issued, and I think that the record is getting better and better. The UK is hosting a lot of Ukrainians, and I think we should be very proud of that.
So perhaps I'll come on to the problems with the Home Office, which, as I've just alluded to, the capacity issues of the Home Office when they designed a whole new visa system. Why is it that British people are waiting so long to get their passports when we all knew there was going to be a surge in passport applications after COVID, with people wanting to travel, have family holidays, get married abroad, all of those things? Why is it that we've ended up with people waiting so long and having to spend so much time and money to get a passport?
Well, it is very frustrating, and I share everybody's frustration. I think the answer is that the demand has been very big because people are very keen to go on holiday. We've rushed people into the passport office.
So why are you having to do that?
And the numbers are starting to improve. I think from memory, 91% get their passport within 4 to 6 weeks.
Well, the standard that the Home Office is supposed to operate on is 3 weeks. It's now 10 weeks. When will it go back down to 3 weeks?
Well, I don't know when it goes back down to 3 weeks, but I think what I have in my head is that 91% get their passport within 4 to 6 weeks. And I'd urge everybody who's thinking of going away, 4 to 6 weeks from now, and hasn't got a passport, to get a passport.
Okay, so the bread and butter issues just aren't being looked at by the Home Office and dealt with in a very good way. Can I just ask you, why is it your government has now got a backlog of 89,000 asylum claims that they haven't decided? Why has that happened?
Well, the UK has historically had very large numbers of asylum claims, and I seem to remember that there were many thousands of asylum claims left undecided when the last Labour government left office.
No, Prime Minister, the asylum claims in this country have remained fairly steady in the last few years. So your Home Office has built up a backlog of nearly 90,000 claims they've not decided. So can I just ask you then, why is your government so bad at actually sending back failed asylum seekers? In 2010, we sent back 10,663. Last year, we sent back 806 failed asylum seekers. Why?
I don't think that it's the fault of the officials. I think they do their level best. I don't think it's that they're so bad. I think it's that our brilliant legal profession is so good at finding reasons why they should not be returned.
That's your answer. It's not to do with the fact you haven't been able to enter into agreements with other countries. You haven't got a replacement for the Dublin agreement.
My impression is that, and certainly if you look at what happened with the Dublin agreement, that broke down across the board, and returns agreements have been extremely hard to.
Well, let's just put it this way: that you sent back 20 people who came across in small boats across the Channel last year, 20, and there were 28,000 that came. Can I just ask you, do you expect the cuts to civil servants that you're talking about, the 20, 30 or 40% cuts, will that help the Home Office get to grips with some of these problems or make it worse?
I think that certainly what you need to, so when you talk about the asylum seekers crossing the channel illegally and in very frail vessels.
No, your cuts.
Yeah, well, the way to fix that is not just by having more civil servants. I think it is to have a proper deterrent for the people traffickers, and to reduce the numbers of people who are being made to risk their lives.
Okay, just my final question, if I may. Could you just confirm, and I just appreciate a yes or a no, that you met with the former KGB officer, Alexander Lebedev, when you were Foreign Secretary without officials on the 28th of April 2018?
Well, I'd have to check, but
Are you having a lapse of memory again?
No, but that sounds. But if you're asking me a very specific question about a very specific date, and I would have to. I'd have to get back. I certainly have met the gentleman in question, who used to be the proprietor of the London Evening Standard. When I was mayor of London, so I certainly am not going to deny having met Alexander Lebedev. I certainly have. As far as I remember, he used to own the London Evening Standard.
Yes, but with officials when you were Foreign Secretary. Did you meet with officials or without officials?
I certainly met him without officials.
Right.
And as I say, he's a
Perhaps you could write to us.
proprietor of a
Perhaps you could write to us with a specific.
very happy to
specific answer to that very specific question.
Yes.
Make Hillier.
Prime Minister, I mean, you said you met without officials. Was that presumably was when you were Mayor of London? When you were Foreign Secretary, did you meet Alexander Lebedev?
I think I
without
probably
officials?
did, but
Probably did.
as I said, I would need to check.
You used to regularly meeting him. I mean, is it probably because you meet him often, or probably because you can't remember?
I've met him on a very few occasions.
As Foreign Secretary.
On the occasion you're mentioning, if that was when I was Foreign Secretary, then yes.
Without officials?
Yes, I mean, that makes sense.
Did you report to your officials that you had met him?
I think I did mention it, yes.
And where did you meet him?
I met him in Italy, as it happens, but I really, I forget. Anyway.
Well, perhaps you'll write to us.
Personal engagement, was it?
Yeah. That's
Personal
exactly right.
engagement initially?
We'll move on. Caroline Notes, Equalities Committee.
Prime Minister, you've referred to the Homes for Ukraine and the Ukrainian Family schemes. Can you give us any indication of what proportion of the visas issued have been to women?
I can't, Caroline. I'm sorry. I'll have to write to you.
Okay, so we're not collecting official statistics on that, but the indicative ones suggest that it's 82% are women, many of whom have children with them. What safeguarding concerns do you have about Ukrainian women being here in the UK?
So one of the reasons why the scheme, people initially complained that the scheme was slow, but we wanted to make sure that people, when they arrived, got a safe environment. And so, as far as I know, the work is done to ensure that they're with families or with people who will look after them properly.
Do you feel comfortable that the accommodation is checked in many instances after people have arrived?
To the best of my knowledge, they have everybody that I've met or who's been involved in the scheme says it's working very well.
So you do feel comfortable if accommodation is checked after people have arrived?
I can't tell you, Caroline, exactly what checks are done on the accommodation after people have arrived, but I know that safeguarding is done to make sure that they have a good experience while they're here.
Do we know how many are no longer with their original sponsors?
I can't give you that, I don't know.
There's certainly indications that there could be as many as 660 Ukrainian households already who are owed a duty under the homelessness prevention. Do you have any concerns about where they're going to end up?
I don't know that that it's right that that there are that many Ukrainians who are homeless in the UK. I think that where there are arrivals who have had a problem with their sponsors, with the household, the councils have a duty to provide a roof for them, and that is supported by a grant of £10,500 per person. So we're not currently aware of any Ukrainian sleeping rough.
Okay, the statistics show that there are 660 Ukrainian households owed a prevention or relief duty for homelessness. Are you, you said earlier today, I think to Clive Betts, that people would be able to switch between the Ukrainian family scheme and the Homes for Ukraine scheme. When do you think that will be possible?
So we're trying to speed things up. I can't tell you when we're going to be able to make those two schemes allow people to move fluidly from one to the next, but clearly there's a logic in that.
And if people should be able to switch between the family scheme and the Homes for Ukraine scheme, should they also be able to switch sponsor within the Homes for Ukraine scheme and have the £350 a month funding follow them?
Interesting idea. We'll have a look at it. I'm not going to extemporize a solution.
If a lone woman has fled a sponsor's home because of safeguarding concerns, do you think the funding should follow her?
I can see the logic of that, yes. But I will certainly have a look at what's happening. I'm sure that particular issue is something that Home Office staff thought
Perhaps
about.
Minister Harrington and Minister Gove, if they're still with us, could look at that. Can I ask you specifically when it comes to safeguarding concerns?
Yes.
Should safeguarding always be straightforward?
Well, of course.
Thank you for that. And finally, we know that people traffickers are operating between on the borders of Ukraine, particularly targeting women and young girls. Do you have any concerns that Ukrainian women are going to turn up on the beaches of Dover, trafficked here in small boats? And if that happens, what should we do to help them?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, that is not happening at the moment. We have safe and legal routes, several safe and legal routes for Ukrainians right now.
Earlier this week, a group of female Ukrainian MPs were at the OSCE meeting, specifically expressing concerns about people trafficking. Mm-hmm. What are you doing with other European governments to make sure that that does not happen?
The Home Office does a huge amount to tackle people trafficking upstream, working with other European governments. The National Crime Agency is heavily involved in that.
Are they specifically looking at the threat to Ukrainian women?
I know that one of the things that when the exodus began, one of the things that we were particularly doing is making sure that we had staff at particularly in Poland, who were looking after the interests of people who are leaving and who might be wanting to come to this country.
Are those staff trained to deal with people trafficking?
I believe so, but I would have to get back to you on that.
Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you. Stephen Crabb, Welsh Affairs.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. We're going to move on to cost of living issues now. Can I start very briefly by asking you, with the appointment of a new Chancellor last night, is the government's position still that it's committed to a full uprating, a full social security uprating next April based on September's CPI figures? So that's a full uprating of benefits and pensions next April.
I'm aware of no change in our policy.
Has the new Chancellor indicated any desire or intention to look at reopen any of the decisions we've made in response to the cost of living crisis, or indeed are there any areas that you would want him to reopen? I
think that what the new Chancellor is going to want to do is continue with the package of support that we set out, and don't forget that there's £1,200 for the 8 million most vulnerable households going into people's bank accounts this month, £400 to help everybody with the costs of energy, cuts to council tax, and I know that the new Chancellor is certainly committed to all of that.
So as far as you're concerned, Prime Minister, the basic template for our response to the cost of living crisis, indeed our wider tax and spend strategy, remains locked for now under the new Chancellor.
Well, you're pushing a bit too hard. I think that that would be, that's not quite the conclusion that I want you to draw. I certainly think that the new Chancellor will want to think about what we can do to do even more to help people, whether on the fiscal front or whatever.
The Minister for Brexit Opportunities recently appeared to be quite dismissive of OBR forecasts, and I think even appeared to question the usefulness of the OBR altogether. Do you, Prime Minister, have confidence in OBR forecasts?
I think that the OBR forecasts are very useful. I don't think that they should necessarily, but my experience is they don't always turn out to be correct. But that doesn't mean that they're without value.
When have they turned out to be correct?
Well, it's just about it's about an answer, I think, a rhetorical question.
So when the OBR in March, Prime Minister, predicted that the UK is going to see the fastest drop in living standards since the 1950s. Is that an OBR forecast that you accept?
I think that we've got to be realistic, that there is going to be a lot of economic pain, and we've got to be frank with people about that, and that is certainly the case. What we will do, so what we're doing is trying to help the lowest income households as much as possible, and actually they may get fully compensated, but there will certainly be, or virtually fully, but there will certainly be a lot of pressure for a while. That pressure will then abate. We will get inflation under control. That is the big problem right now. But I'm very confident that it will have abated by next year.
And is the latest economic advice that you're receiving, Prime Minister, that OBR forecast about the drop in living standards is indeed correct, or are you receiving advice, any evidence to point to a softer landing, or indeed things getting even worse next week?
No, I want to repeat things. An inflation spike like this takes a long time to work through, and we've just got to be realistic about that. And there is going to be pressure on people's incomes, and there's going to be pressure on people's budgets, and it really is. We cannot ignore that. We will try to help people with massive or very substantial contributions to their paper to support them. And I mentioned some of the sums that make up the £37 billion of support. But we also have to fix the underlying causes of inflation.
I mean, Prime Minister, you said a few moments ago, and I think you're absolutely correct, it's going to be very, very painful. And indeed, if the OBR forecast about living standards is anything like correct, it's going to be absolutely brutal for many families out there in the country in the months.
I didn't say that, Stephen.
That's my language.
Yeah.
Your language was painful, very painful. Do you accept, Prime Minister, forgive me for asking this, that at a time of such economic crisis for the country, for many families up and down the country, that what the country needs is a government with the very best team, the very best focus, absolutely squarely focused on tackling these issues? And when you see, Prime Minister, people like John Glenn leaving government, people like Kemi Badenoch, people like Neil O'Brien, one of the intellectual architects of levelling up, do you not feel, Prime Minister, the very ability, capacity of this government to address these enormous overhanging issues is deteriorating as we speak?
Well, when I came into Parliament, I think there were about 140 Conservative MPs. I can't remember exactly what the number was. There are now 365 or so, the 360 there or thereabouts. There is a wealth of talent, Stephen.
Order.
We should be confident in our ability to. And as for your point about the government focusing, the government is certainly focusing on the issues that matter. And today we're cutting taxes for everybody by £330 for 30 million people. Just this day, I've talked about the £1,200. We've just got 500,000 people off welfare into work.
Very quickly, Prime Minister, you're being very kind about us on the back benches, but actually I think you're going to find it extremely hard to appoint people of the same calibre of the kind of ministers I've mentioned to you. I think you can find it extremely difficult.
Well,
think
you know,
you don't need to reply to that point. I think the point's been made. You're catching my eye. You were a little bit under time. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Prime Minister, just following on from that, you've had more resignations since any Prime Minister since 1932. Michael Gove has told you to go. The charade's up, the game's up, really. Will you be Prime Minister tomorrow?
Of course, Mr. McNeill. But
Next week?
I'm here to, rather than giving any running commentary on my own career, I'm here to talk about what the government is doing. And
okay.
That is, so that's what I was telling Stephen, and we're doing a lot. More and more.
Hugh Merriman, Transport.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. In the 6 minutes I have, Prime Minister, I want to talk to you about transport policy delivery, if you're focused. I want to talk about rail, air, and also road. Starting with rail, do you have all of the policy and legal interventions and levers that you need to end this rail strike?
Thanks very much, Hugh. I think I call on the union barons and the railway companies to sort this out. I think that they should be able to do it, and I think that yes, we probably do need a few more tools to.
Specifically, what?
I think that you could have minimum service levels, you could have ballot thresholds, and as you know, we're bringing in. I think we've already brought in the provision for agency workers where that's necessary. Now, that's not going to fix problems like train drivers. You don't get agency workers to drive a train, but the argument I would make is that you need to modernise.
So let me just again focus on the levers, because I think under the Conservative manifesto there was a line that said only the Conservatives could get Brexit done, a few more things, and stop passengers being held hostage by the unions. But in fact, and that was with the introduction of that policy of minimum service levels. Yet that hasn't been introduced, and people are being held hostage, which might be your view. So why did you not bring, with an 80-seat majority, that legislation through before the strike started? That
is a very good question. And
the answer is?
And the answer is we should have done it. And the trouble was we had a lot of COVID stuff to deal with, and I'm afraid it got pushed to the right. I
thought you might say that, but there have been other things we've been able to do, notwithstanding COVID. Okay, let me move on to airports. So massive disruption in the airports, people having their holidays cancelled at the last minute. Why wasn't more done to stop airlines putting more flights in place than we knew their staff could, that they had the bandwidth of staff to deal with?
Well, the airlines should not be abusing passengers in the way that that they have been, and I think that there should be greater protection. But I think
But again, this is all there should be. My question is why hasn't there been?
Because basically we were trying to get any airlines flying at all. I mean, Diana has asked a very good question about passports. Where we're putting huge numbers of people trying to speed up the delivery of passports. We had a situation in which no airlines were moving at all. We had to put 8 billion, as you remember, Hugh, into supporting the airline industry.
Indeed, but Gatwick, for example, has controlled the number of flights that will be able to fly out during July and August, because they can see the airlines are trying to fly at 2018 levels. So they could see the number of staff coming on. So they've taken action. Other airports haven't necessarily. The regulator, the Civil Aviation Authority, doesn't have the power up front to implement these types of policies. Shouldn't it have that power?
I'm willing to be persuaded that it should.
Because when we put a report on that basis, the recommendation was rejected by government on the basis that there wouldn't be a proposal to give the regulator upfront powers to take action, including to help with compensation.
Well, Hugh,
but perhaps we can push them a bit more on that. I'm
going to have to look into what more powers we might need to take to get the airlines to behave responsibly towards their passengers. But I think the experience of the public has been pretty wretched at the moment, and for all sorts of reasons, and they need to do much better.
Okay, and turning to another area of policy, which perhaps needs to change. At the moment, 4% of the Exchequer's revenues come from motoring taxes. Those will plummet to zero when we all drive electric vehicles. Are you serious about getting a new form of road pricing policy in place to fill that hole? If not, how will it be filled?
I think road pricing is something that we will eventually have to consider. I'm not attracted to it. I seem to remember. I think I successfully campaigned to remove the western extension of the congestion.
No, I'm not talking about road charging in that way. I'm talking about, as we do at the moment, we charge people for the mile they drive, because that's what fuel duty does. So you'll have to replace that.
I see what you mean. So like for electric vehicles as well, so that you charge a mileage.
Yeah, something along those lines.
So it is certainly the case that we will need a substitute for fuel duty.
And this, Bernard, comes back to my point about policy delivery, because
This is imminent. We're introducing electric cars.
Bernard, can I say this, if you don't mind? So for 3 months, Prime Minister, number 10 has had a recommendation just to look at this, because something has to fill the 4%.
Okay.
Have a working body to look at it. The Treasury signed off on it. And for 3 months, it's been sat in number 10. 1 week, I'm told somebody's signed off on it. And next week, someone else has looked at it and actually has stopped it. And it's stuck. And my question is, the inertia inside number 10, perhaps because of the events that we'll go on to talk about, is that
Nonsense.
actually, we say it's nonsense, but actually it's a nonsense that we've been waiting 3 months just for someone to sign off on something which fills 4% of the exchequer. That is the nonsense. Do you not agree something should be done? Or if you can't do it, do you think that perhaps someone else could come in and run it properly?
Yeah. So this number 10 actually was the first government in Europe to set a timetable for moving away from hydrocarbon, from internal combustion engine cars by 2030.
Yeah, I know exactly, and that's why Prime Minister, you should follow through on the consequences of it.
We've been looking at blistering speed. We will certainly look at we're looking at all fiscal proposals to replace fuel duty, and I'm happy to come back.
You're not. You're actually currently sitting on all proposals.
I cannot believe that the Treasury is showing the slightest hesitation or reluctance to find a new way of.
No, that's my point. The Treasury
taxation.
signed off on it. Number 10 then insisted on looking at it and has been sat on it for 3 months. I think Andrew Griffiths is currently the one that's now said, no, I don't like this. And we are therefore stuck, having thought we cleared all the hurdles.
I will take it up with
Prime Minister, I'll just add,
Thank you, sir.
I was Shadow Transport Secretary in 2000, and road charging was seen as the future then. Successive governments have dodged it, but why is your government dodging it when you're already abandoning the revenue stream from hydrocarbons?
So Bernard, why do you think we necessarily are? We've got to find a way of filling the gap left by.
You've actually got a target for eliminating fossil fueled cars, but you haven't got any plan in place to replace the revenue.
Well, I think it highly unlikely that the Treasury will let any opportunity go to find to raise revenue from motoring to substitute.
I think we've made our
what we
point.
want to do is we want, for the purposes of the environment, to encourage the take-up of low carbon vehicles, and that's why the fiscal strategy is framed as it currently is. So that's what we're doing for the time being.
My apologies to Darren Jones-Bayes. I should have brought you in earlier.
Thank you, sir. Prime Minister, how's your week going?
Terrific. Like many others.
Did Michael Gove come and tell you to resign today?
I think I said earlier, Sir Bernard, that I'm here to talk about what the government is doing. I'm not going to give a running commentary on political events.
Okay, so let's talk about what the government's doing. You've just said today that the government's giving the biggest tax cut in a decade, but it's a tax cut to your own tax rise, isn't it?
No, what it does is it gives people, 30 million people, by lifting the thresholds, it gives them on average a tax cut of £330.
Against the tax rise that you previously announced. In fact, freezing tax allowances for average income taxpayers means they're going to pay £46.8 billion more over the next 4 years. Tax is going up, not down, isn't it?
It is certainly true that what we've had to do is make sure that we deal with the fiscal impacts of COVID. And I think the committee will remember that this was a We had a colossal fall in output. We had the biggest pandemic for 100 years, and we had to look after people and businesses to the tune of 408 billion pounds. That money doesn't grow on trees. We've had to, so in order to protect our schools, our hospitals, we of course have had to increase that. We've had the health and care levy. But what we're doing
Prime
now
Minister, I just need
is
to move you
helping
on,
people
Prime Minister.
on average with
Prime
a
Minister,
£350 tax cut.
I asked about the tax cut announced today, but I'll just move on. Let's look about the economy before the pandemic, because you mentioned the pandemic, understandable event that was very difficult for government. But before the pandemic, between 2010, when the Conservative Party came into office, and before the pandemic, national debt increased by £640 billion. It's now 100% of national wealth, and you keep announcing tax cuts and spending plans at the same time. Are you just going to keep putting more and more debt onto the nation's credit card?
So you were just complaining about taxes going up.
I'm asking you about what you're doing in government, Prime Minister.
Get your story straight.
Oh, well, my facts are from the Treasury, Prime Minister.
What we're doing is we have to be sensible. We have to be responsible. We're making sure that we manage the public finances in a prudent way. But I think that there will be scope for further tax cuts in due time.
Maybe imminently, perhaps. Can I just move on? Prime Minister, can I just move on to economic growth? You said yesterday you welcomed your new Chancellor, Nadine Zahawi.
Yes.
Because he would grow the economy in a way that presumably Rishi Sunak couldn't. But we're more likely to end up in a recession.
I don't think I said that, but anyway, go on.
Well, we're more likely to end up in a recession this winter, aren't we?
Look, I think that as I was saying to Stephen, I think that the economies that people are going to be under a lot of pressure, but I think we'll get through it.
Do you think there'll be a recession in the winter?
I think that there will be a lot of pressure caused by the price spike. We are going to do everything we can to shield people, to deal with the underlying causes of inflation, whether that's through the energy markets or the labour markets or whatever. And there's a lot we can do. And I think we'll emerge stronger the other side.
Okay. So you've often said, and your supporters have often said, that you've got all the big calls right as Prime Minister. But actually on tax, on debt, on growth, on pay, things have been getting worse, not better. 14 million people, I understand, voted for you in 2019. You've let them down, haven't you?
No, I think that what they can see is a government that gets on relentlessly with a programme of uniting and levelling up. We've got the biggest investment in infrastructure for a century, £650 billion going in on roads, all the things that Hugh was talking about, roads, rail, transport of all kinds, housing. It is a colossally ambitious programme that we are still doing, and at the same time, because actually we got the as you put it, Darren, the big calls right on.
I didn't agree with
COVID.
that, by the way.
Well, I'm going to agree with it, even if you don't. We got the big calls right on COVID. We came out of lockdown faster. We got it right with the vaccine. That enabled us. That's put us in a position to look after people.
Thank
and
you.
that's what we're doing.
We're just going to move on to my next question. I'd like to just read something out to you. Quote, when a regime has been in power for too long, when it has fatally exhausted the patience of the people, and when oblivion finally beckons, I am afraid that across the world you can rely on the leaders of that regime to act solely in the interests of self-preservation and not in the interests of the electorate. Who authored that quote?
You're trying me. Was it Cicero? Was it Aristotle?
Lord Farlow.
Prime Minister, you might like to think.
Let me just think.
I think you might be more like
Plato.
Maybe Nero.
Was it Montesquieu?
Maybe Nero. Just to break it to you, it was you, Prime Minister. And perhaps it was foresight for the final week. Now, can I just finish? Because I'm about to run out of time, Prime Minister.
Okay.
Because I made a joke there, but in all sincerity, and I know this must be difficult for you personally, but this isn't funny. It's not a game. People are struggling across the country. I'm just finished. It's not brave for you to carry on doing this. I think, in my view, you're hurting the country, Prime Minister, just on a very human level. Surely you must know that it's in the country's interest for you to leave now, isn't it?
I think that the country is going through tough times, and I think that we have the biggest. You're making a point about duty, right?
Yeah.
And I look at the issues that this country faces. I look at the pressures that people are under, and the need for government to focus on their priorities, which is what we are doing. I look at the biggest war in Europe for 80 years, and I cannot for the life of me see how it is responsible just to walk away from that, as I said earlier on in PMQs, particularly not when you have a mandate of the kind that we won 2-3 years ago.
But shouldn't, as Prime Minister, you actually spell out that the pressure the economy is under is actually very, very serious, because not just of the invasion, but because we have decided to make the necessary sacrifices in order to resist Putin. And we are in an economic war with Russia now, with Putin. He's coining it on the energy sales. Our economies are suffering as a direct consequence of the sanctions. Shouldn't we be spelling out that it's going to be tough, but these sacrifices are necessary to make in order to secure the security of our continent?
Thank you, Sir Bernard. And that is exactly the point that I have been making. I think I made it yesterday or on Monday, I should say, in the statement on the summits. And it's the point that resonates with colleagues around the table in NATO and the G7 and other places, because the cost of not standing up to Putin is that you legitimate or you encourage further acts of aggression in other parts of the former Soviet Union, destabilizing the whole continent, if not the world, causing further economic distress and uncertainty going on for years and years. And that's why I made the point about the decades of peace and stability that followed the Second World War, when we finally learned to stand up to dictators and not to accept that borders could be changed by force. That decision led to decades of the rule of international law, expansion of global trade, peace and stability, and we need to inaugurate that era again.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Rob Half on education.
Starting off with fuel, and then I'm going to as it segues in. If I could just move from Ukraine to a fish and chip shop in Harlow, Prime Minister, if I may. They are down 150 customers a month. Their takings are down £5,000 a month. Their energy bills have gone up from £1,800 to £3,000 a month, and now he's got to pay over £2 to fill up his car and the vehicles, £2 a litre. Can you understand what is fueling the haulier protests? Whilst I don't agree with direct action, I do have sympathy for what they're asking for. And is it not the case that the 5p fuel duty cut, whilst welcome, was swallowed up, and that actually this is unsustainable, and that you need to slash either fuel duty or VAT, but also to look at introduce a pump watch monitor, because just finally, we know that since the 14th of June, the wholesale price for diesel fell by 7.2 per litre, but filling up costs increased by 8.1p. For petrol, the wholesale price dropped by 14.9p, but the pump price rocketed by 17.4p. So motorists, everywhere you look at it, they're being fleeced by the government and they're being fleeced by the oil companies. So what are you going to do it? Because if you don't do something, there is going to be a Canada-style haulier protest around the Palace of Westminster. I have no doubt that this is going to spread.
Yeah, well, look, Robert, thank you. You've been campaigning on this for years and years, and I listened to you very attentively. As you say, we have cut fuel duty by 5p for a litre. It's only about 100 quid a year. I appreciate that that's not much for people, and it's being swallowed up by what's happening on the forecourts. So we are doing Grant is, I believe, doing a pump watch scheme to ensure that cuts that we are putting in do get passed on. But clearly, the pressure is there, and I hear you loud and clear. I think before Angus leaves, one of the benefits of Brexit is you can cut VAT on fuel. So I should have pointed that out.
But you recognise you need to slash it. You need to literally cut it by a significant amount, because this is unsustainable. It's hurting our frontline services, it's hitting our bus services, hitting transportation, and it's hurting our businesses as well.
I hear you loud and clear. So we have a new chancellor. We will see where we get to on that. But I hear you loud and clear.
Okay. If I can move to education, I was distressed about the closure of schools, and I thought it was a huge mistake that they were closed for most pupils during
COVID.
During COVID, I thought it was a huge mistake, something acknowledged by the previous Education Secretary, now Chancellor. We now know that there are 124,000 so-called ghost children who've not yet returned to school. Persistent absence has gone up from 1.6 million to 1.7 million. What is the government doing to get these kids back into school? And will you look at rolling out a programme of 2,000 school attendance mentors, not necessarily new employees, but school employees, existing local authorities employees and charity employees, to work with the families to get these children back into school? And you could use existing money from the Supporting Families Fund, the £80 million from the Supporting Families Fund, in order to do so.
So, first of all, I agree with your overall premise that it was awful that schools had to close. We didn't want to do it. We tried to keep it for as short a period as possible. We're trying to get kids back into school as much as we can. One of the things we're spending about £5 billion on school on catch up, but one of the things that I think is important, and I believe it very strongly, is trying to give kids one-on-one or one-on-two, one-on-three the opportunity of tuition, which they might not otherwise have.
But those are the children in school. So we need to I'm talking about the ones who are not in school. 1.7 million persistent absence, 100,000 children who disappeared off 124,000 children who disappeared off the school rolls, the so-called ghost children.
Yeah, Robert, we will do everything we can to get these children back into school, and what we're doing is putting another £5 billion, or putting £5 billion into education recovery. So there's a lot for tutoring, but also direct targeting for those most in need, so that a £2 billion fund, which should help schools to get those ghost children back. But this is something that I'm afraid is going to require a joined up effort. It requires councils, it requires a lot of bodies to come together to get those children back into school.
Children's Commissioner said that she wants all the kids back by September. I just think the priority for education should be the Education Department should be to get these children back into school. It's just wrong that so many children are missing school and not yet returned. They have faced safeguarding pressures, damage their mental health, lifetime chance of joining county line gangs. And I would urge you to look at the Supporting Families Fund, as I mentioned, the £80 million. Just very finally, I brought through a 10-minute rule bill called the National School Infrastructure Bill, which would treat schools the same as other national infrastructure to stop schools closing again. And that if, God forbid, there was another wave of COVID and the government decided to make a decision to close schools, that the Children's Commissioner would have a veto, and that Parliament would make an individual decision on school closures every 6 weeks.
What's the question?
Do you support that concept of making schools part of national?
Rob, we're very happy to look at it, and I understand where you're coming from. I think that it's clear from the data I'm seeing that the damage to kids' education, particularly for the done by the lockdown, continues, and it's disappointing to see the literacy and numeracy stats. We need to do better, and there's no question in my mind that's been partly caused by the closures.
Right, we're going to move on to integrity in politics. We are bound to overrun somewhat because we have to do this subject justice. So I hope, Prime Minister, you'll be able to stay until we've finished. Rob Halfon, Justice. Sorry, Bob Neal, Justice.
How important is the truth to you, Prime Minister?
Very important, Bob.
And accuracy of language and statement?
Also.
Very important.
Very, very important.
And do you expect those standards from those who work for you in Downing Street, either as spokespeople or those who brief ministers to speak on behalf of the government?
Yes.
Can you help me about this. The story concerning the Honourable Member for Tamworth broke on the morning, late evening of the 29th, morning of the Thursday, the 30th. In the course of subsequent days, a number of statements were made by spokesmen on your behalf, in which it was said in terms that you had not been aware of any specific allegations. That's correct.
Yes, and that was not right. And just so the committee understands what I was doing. So on the Friday, when the allegations were put to me in detail and the fact that a complaint had been made, I was mainly engaged in talking to a witness and removing the whip from the member in question. That's what I.
Okay. Well, I suppose I can come to that.
What we should have done at the same time, and I then left the building. But what we should have done is gone over all the interactions between government, me, and the member for Tamworth, and got a full timeline. And I'm afraid we didn't. And
that's in retrospect.
And I should have done that. But as a result, some things were said that weren't right. As soon as I was aware of the discrepancy, we took steps.
Can you just tell me about? Okay. Well, what we do know is that on the 5th of July, Lord MacDonald of Salford, who was the permanent secretary, Under Secretary at the Foreign Office, said this: that the line that had been put out was not accurate. Which you now accept. Said this in a letter to the Parliamentary Commission for Standards. Mr. Johnson was briefed in person about the initiation and outcome of the investigation. There was a formal complaint. I'm sure you've seen Lord MacDonald's letter now. Great. Do you accept the content, the accuracy of the content of Lord MacDonald's letter?
And so that's entirely right. Correct. So if I could just
you accept what Lord MacDonald says.
I wouldn't want to say that I accept absolutely everything he says, because but what I can certainly tell you is that I don't have it before me. What I can certainly tell you is that there was a complaint.
Yes, and you were told
the member for Tamworth in 2019.
Yes, late 2019.
And that complaint was upheld.
Yes.
The matter was resolved within the Foreign Office. It was not deemed to approach the anything like level of criminality or the ministerial code. Okay. But I was briefed on it on 2 occasions by the propriety and ethics people who first of all that it was happening, and then
what the outcome was, I imagine.
And on both occasions, what I had was an extremely short oral account, of which there was on Friday there was no record of that in number 10.
It didn't stick in your mind then?
There's no written record of that.
Forgive me. It isn't common for a serving Minister of the Crown to be subject to an allegation of sexual impropriety, is it?
I don't want to go into the details of the allegations, because I think there are human resources issues there. But I'm not certain that's a fair characterization of what happened.
At all events, it was a serious matter. And this was someone who had worked closely on your leadership team only a few months before. So you'd be aware it was sensitive.
That's fair. Yes.
Okay.
It was also to be fair, almost 2.5 years ago.
Well, yes. But it's not the sort of thing you forget, is it, Prime Minister?
Well, as I say, now that when it was drawn to my attention a couple of days later that there was a discrepancy between what we were saying abroad, as it were, and what number 10 was saying, and the fact that this briefing had taken place, I took steps to clear it up as soon as I could.
The suggestion you couldn't recall that was said on your behalf, is that a serious explanation? You couldn't recall this unusual incident of someone who was a close political ally?
What we failed to do on the first day was to go over all the possible interactions between me and the member in question, all the possible decisions that I might have taken. As it happened, the issue, the report about the complaint was not raised to me as a point for any kind of decision. It was simply something that was mentioned to me in the margin of other meetings as a point of, as I recall, as a point of information about what had happened, because it was the Foreign Office that dealt with it.
But Prime Minister, when you were considering appointing him into the government most recently, how true is it that actually you wanted him to be Chief Whip?
Not my recollection, Sir Bernard. I don't think so. I think the suggestion was that he was going to be Deputy Chief Whip. And I think that's what happened.
And what happened to all the messages pouring into Downing Street about the risk of appointing this person?
Well,
there were plenty of them.
Well, I don't know how many there were, but there was certainly.
But why couldn't, I mean, there's a cultural problem here. Why couldn't the system hear that there was concern about this appointment?
I don't think that's entirely fair.
Well, then why did you refer it
if you're
to
talking
the
about
ethics and to the ethics and proprietary director in the Cabinet Office? Why was that necessary if there wasn't a concern?
Okay, every ministerial appointment automatically goes to the proprietary and ethics team, so they look at everyone.
William Ragg.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Good afternoon.
I appreciate that today is a day of events, and though this meeting has not quite resembled a Moscow show trial, because I think certainly they were livelier, it must be nonetheless quite difficult, and I do pay tribute to you for turning up today.
I wouldn't dream of being anywhere else.
Having said that,
delighted to be here.
Having said that, at which point does it become impossible for the Queen's government to be continued?
I really think that William, you're underestimating the talent, energy, and sheer ambition of members of Parliament, and they want to get things done. They want to get things done for their constituents, and the government of the country is being carried on with ever increasing energy.
Well, they seem to want to get one thing done at the moment in time. I agree with you on that. But I think the issue that we have is that you've had, at least my initial calculation at the start of the meeting was 27 ministers and aides resigning. There have been more in the meantime. Do you think there are swelling ranks of those young thrusters on the back benches who could replace them?
I think it highly likely, yes.
Ambition, could that not be considered delusion at times?
Yeah, that's a sort of a moral judgment about human nature that, I wouldn't venture to comment on. I think that we're all deluded in our ambitions, but I think most people who come to this place actually, in spite of what everybody says about MPs, are actuated by the highest motives. And most people want to serve their constituents and get stuff done, and that is the reality.
Entirely so. So, in terms of that assessment of individuals, which qualities in the former Deputy Chief Whip appeal to you most?
I think it was. So let me just big picture.
No,
as I've said before, I think. Let me be clear that with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that appointment, as I said in the House, and I think I said on TV as well. I think that appointment was a mistake.
Well, I want to know about the qualities of ministers. And if you had our government appointments based upon ability.
So it was put to me that like everyone we appoint, the member had excellent administrative skills.
Administrative skills. Was he behind what's colloquially known as Operation Save Big Dog?
To the best of my memory, he was in addition to serving as Deputy Chief Whip under the previous Prime Minister, he did a stint at the Foreign Office and then a stint at the Department of Communities and Local Government when he was involved. He had a role in housing, and the accounts I had were positive.
Casting our minds back to January and February, it was a tricky time. And certainly some people in the shadow whipping operation used their charm in order to persuade. And I think it's fair to say others used aspects of what we might describe as being offensive to work that wonder for you. So why was Mr. Pincher the first to be invited into Downing Street on the day of the reshuffle when the most senior job available was that of Chief Whip? Ordinarily, it would be awarded to the person
No, well,
first.
okay, I got it. That's going back to Bernard's point. I think that's a red herring.
Did any colleagues come to you on that day and express concerns about that appointment or potential appointment?
Not to me, but concerns. What happened was that concerns were expressed actually after I had made the appointment.
Why was he in there for 4 hours though before the appointment was made?
For that reason, I made the appointment, and then when it got on with making other appointments, but there was a problem that needed to be resolved.
What was that problem?
I think that I probably ought to, given that this member is.
No, they're investigating him, Prime Minister. They're not investigating you.
Yeah,
So
but I don't want to offer any more commentary that might or might not be.
I'm sorry, they're asking you
might or
questions.
might not be correct about it.
Well, come on.
It's quite a
He's
direct
asking a
question.
straightforward question, Prime Minister.
About your judgment and
Yeah.
how you approach appointing ministers.
Yes. So let me be clear. I made the appointment. There was then I then got on with making other appointments. There was then a delay while the matter was cleared up in announcing the appointment. I was told that it had been cleared up, and we got on with it.
What needed to be cleared up?
It was a matter concerning another colleague that I really don't want to. It would not be right for me to go into.
No, it wouldn't be right because what happened to that colleague wasn't right at all, was it?
Well, I wasn't informed of that at the time, but having been subsequently informed about it, I can see that it's another reason not to have done, not to have had that minister, if it was true, not to have had that minister in post. But on the other hand,
If it was true, do you believe that colleague who came to you or made overtures to number 10, or do you believe Mr. Pincher?
Look, I think that these things have to be examined. I'm not going to make a comment about that. I think what happened was that my team interviewed both people and resolved the matter, and that's why we proceeded as we did.
Are you familiar with the Lassalle's principles?
I knew you were going to ask this, and I
sorry,
can't,
Mr. Ragg,
I
before
can't.
you move on.
I know this is about Tommy.
Did you watch the crowd?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go on, remind me.
So if you were to go to Her Majesty and request, as it is a request, not to advise, but request a dissolution of Parliament, could you give me 2 conditions under which Her Majesty would be justified in declining your request?
I can look. You're asking about something that is not going to happen unless everybody's so crazy as to try and have a new. We are going to get on. There is no. I don't think the people of this country want to have an election, and I certainly don't.
Excuse me, Prime Minister, you said it's not going to happen unless.
Well, I think that the history teaches us that the best way to have a period of stability and government and not to have early elections is to allow people with mandates to get on.
Unless what? Unless what?
That's what I'm saying. So the
No,
history
you said unless what?
So unless people ignore that very good principle that history teaches us that the best way to avoid pointless political disturbance is to allow a government that has a mandate to get on and deliver its mandate.
But unless what?
That is what we're going to do.
So
unless what?
I think what you're alluding to is...
Sorry, Mr. Ragg, just a minute. The Prime Minister said...
Unless people forget that.
What does that mean?
That means that on the whole, I think that it's a good thing if governments which have a substantial mandate from the electorate and are doing an enormous amount of stuff, and are, when that country is facing a lot of pressure, particularly economic pressure, when there are serious international issues at stake, I think on the whole it is sensible not to get bogged down in discussion about electoral politics, but to allow the government of the country to continue.
Can I just remind you that when the Prime Minister Major seemed to be threatening a general election because he was having trouble with the Maastricht Bill, it did his no reputation any good at all.
Well, it's exactly the point I made.
There would never have been a general election.
Can I thank you for that excellent historical less, and it's exactly the point I'm trying to make.
Well, I don't know why you said in less. Mr. Ragg.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. And so, if one of the conditions of the South's principles is that the sovereign could rely on finding another Prime Minister who could govern for a reasonable period with a working majority of the House of Commons, you'd accept that principle?
I think all this is, I want to agree passionately and strongly with what Sir Bernard has said. If you go back to
Prime Minister,
the 90s, that you don't solve problems by threatening to call elections. You've got to get on with what you're elected to do, and that's what the government is. That's what the government is doing.
So I'm taking it that you accept the Lassel's principles.
They sound, insofar as they're designed to prevent pointless wildcat elections, they sound sensible to me.
Thank you, Sir Bernard.
Mr. Brand.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Welcome, Prime Minister. Have you been told of any other allegations similar to the conduct of Mr. Pincher about any other ministers in your time as Prime Minister?
I'm going to have to tell you, Chris, that it is all too possible that people have said things to me about any number of people, including possibly people around this horseshoe.
No, have you ever had?
It would be a great labour for me now to sit down and try to reconstruct every single piece of gossip or innuendo.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm not asking about gossip and innuendo. I'm asking precisely about that you now accept that you were told on 2 occasions about Mr. Pincher's, the allegations against Mr. Pincher that were upheld
by
in the Foreign Office. I'm asking, have you been told about any other such events relating to any other government minister formally?
Look, I'd have to get back to you. I mean, I would not want to.
It seems extraordinary that you wouldn't know whether there are allegations outstanding against your government ministers of sexual impropriety, such that they might constitute potentially criminal offences apart from anything else.
Look, there's nothing that springs to mind. Okay. But you know,
all right.
I'm gonna but what I will say, Chris, is if you have some information.
No, I'm asking you, Prime Minister, I'm asking you this because it seems incredible to me that you would not remember that you've been told this about somebody who is one of your closest allies in Parliament.
I think I tried to explain exactly the circumstances.
Well, you haven't. But let me ask you a different question, because you've not answered this elsewhere. Did you say all the sex pests are supporting me, or words to that effect?
People attribute all sorts of things to me. I don't remember saying those words, but people ascribe all sorts of things to me.
That sounds like a yes to me. Okay. Did you say he's a bit handsy?
It's not a word I use, actually.
So that's a definite no.
I would not have used that word, but you know.
It's a definite no, is it?
Look, I'm saying people maybe hear me say all sorts of things. It's not handsy, as it happens, is not a word I use. But
all right. Did you say Pincher by name, Pincher by nature?
I'm not going to get into some trivializing discussion of what I may or may not have said. This is a serious matter.
Yes.
The member is now being has had I believe he's had a complaint made against him, and that is where I propose to leave it.
No, but the point is.
The members had a complaint made against him.
If you just let me for a moment. The point is that the allegation is that you have trivialized this issue. You've not even remembered it, perhaps because he's a useful ally to you. And the point is that then you appointed somebody who you believed to be a sex pest in a position of power and authority over other people in Parliament.
So that's not right, because under any view, the issue at the Foreign Office was, although it was upheld, it was resolved in a way that was satisfactory.
It was upheld.
It was resolved in a way that was satisfactory to all parties, and there are issues that I can't be confident that it was a sexual. There was sexual implications.
Well, Sir Malcolm, Mr. McDonald makes Lord McDonald, sorry, makes it very clear that it was very similar to the allegations that, of what happened
The trouble is, if I may say so, that I was given on the occasions when it was mentioned to me, I was given very brief, a very sketchy account,
Okay.
and I really think that you need.
It just seems incredible that you wouldn't think that was a matter worth investigating or talking. Can I ask you, was Neil Parish right?
It was investigated, and it was investigated.
And it was
by the
upheld.
Foreign Office.
Was Neil Parish right to resign from Parliament?
Well, I think that the problem he had was that he was.
Was he right to resign?
It was his decision.
Was he right to resign?
I think that he was doing something that is not normal or tolerated in most workplaces.
So should Chris Pincher resign from Parliament?
Well, you ask about my relationship with him. I took the whip away from him.
Should he resign from Parliament?
That's a matter for him.
So you think he should stay?
Well, that's a matter for him. But I took the he no longer sits as a Conservative.
All right.
MP.
Was it right for Sarah Dines to ask the man who was groped in the Carlton Club whether he was gay and to say that it was problematic that he was?
You're asking me about what other members are alleged to have said. I can't be certain.
No, there are 5 other, including people in this room, there are 5 other MPs who witnessed it. It's not in any doubt, and I don't think she has denied it. Was it right? Or is it not victim shaming?
Let me put it this way. I think that what happened was extremely serious, and as soon as I knew that a complaint had been made, and I talked to a witness, and I removed the whip.
Have you talked to Sarah Dines about it?
I haven't talked to her about that, but I removed the whip immediately.
Do you not understand why this is problematic? Because it means that being gay for some reason or other makes you sort of asking for it.
Chris, look, I see why you're putting it like that. I don't know whether I very much doubt that Sarah meant it to be.
You said
that way.
You said yesterday about Chris Pincher, if I had my time again, this is a bit of Captain Hindsight, if you don't mind me saying, but if I had my time again,
you know who he is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's you. If I had my time again, I would think back on it and recognise he wasn't going to learn any lessons and he wasn't going to change. But that's true about you, isn't it? You're not going to learn any lessons and you're not going to change. You're not capable of changing. We'll be doing this again, time and time again, if you stay in post, won't you?
Well, coming to this committee, I will. And yes, I will. I hope very much to be.
Come on. You know what he's
invited.
asking, Prime Minister. He's not asking that question.
Well, I don't know quite well. I mean,
you know exactly what I'm asking. You don't. This is all about you in the end. The reason these things happen is because of you. He took liberties because he knows that you take liberties and get away with it, and allow other people to get away with taking liberties.
That's right. I'm not quite sure what you're driving at there.
I think you know perfectly well what I'm driving at. But you were asked. You said on one of the other broadcasts. You said, if you're saying you want me to undergo some sort of psychological transformation, I think that our listeners would know that that is not going to happen. Isn't that the problem? We need a psychological transformation if you're to stay in office.
With the greatest possible respect, what I think we all need to do is focus on the things that our electorates sent us here to settle for them. And they are how to fix the post-COVID economic shocks, and that's what we're doing. How to make sure that we improve the life chances of every kid growing up in this country. And I think what Robert said about kids being excluded from school was incredibly important, and I'm going to go away and look at that. These are the issues that matter to the people of this country, and that does not exclude the fascination that people will have with these other subjects. But that is what I am focused on.
No, they also focus on honesty and decency and propriety and standards in public life, and they hate it when people, when they get caught out, just want to turn over the table and abolish all the rules. But let me ask you one very specific final question, which is just about the ministerial code, because it enshrines the existence of the independent advisor on the ministerial interests in the ministerial code. You haven't got one at the moment. I hope you're going to appoint one very soon, and you can tell us who that's going to be. but you authorised an investigation into Mark Spencer's alleged Islamophobia, which I gather Lord Geit had very nearly completed. When will that be completed and when will it be published?
That's a very good question. I think that Lord Geit did give me a brief update on it. I had the impression that it was nearing conclusion. I'll have to get back to you.
And is there going to be a replacement?
Yes,
when?
There will be. As soon as we can find one. I think the difficulty.
You haven't got enough ministers to appoint yet, let alone you've lost 32 now.
I'm sure there will be no shortage of candidates. If I could just explain a bit about the replacement for Lord Geit. I do think there is an issue, and I think that we need to think about it collectively, which is what happens when we appoint these people. I think that they can become very exposed and very vulnerable to abuse, to political pressure, to campaigns, and I'm just giving you my view. They're much more public than they used to be. So Christopher, I think, did an outstanding job, but he was facing a lot of public pressure.
He resigned because he thought you'd lied to him.
That's not what he said. He said that he resigned over the question of whether steel tariffs should be imposed.
He didn't resign over steel tariffs. You know perfectly well that's not the truth.
I'm sure you've seen his letter.
I have, yes.
That's what he says. I think the issue there was whether imposing or retaining steel tariffs in the UK
he
resigned.
Breach of
WTO.
I'm sorry, Prime Minister. He resigned, as he says in his letter, because he knew that he wanted to initiate an investigation into your breaching of the ministerial code, but he couldn't do so without resigning, and that put him in an impossible position. That's expressly what his letter says.
Sorry, well then you must have seen another letter, because that's not what.
No, I read it and you didn't.
I'm going to have to disagree with you gently there.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Chair, after that outbreak of mythomania, let's perhaps get down to some facts. So, Prime Minister, you know my job in Parliament is to do the maths. You have a pen there. Could you tell us what 148 plus 32 adds up to?
I'm going to leave that. I think what you're inviting me to do.
No, I'm asking you a simple question, Prime Minister. Right, okay. And earlier I asked you how many MPs you have. Perhaps someone slipped you a note just to remind you how many Conservative MPs you have in Parliament.
I think, Meg,
do you know how many Conservative MPs you have in Parliament?
I think, Meg, this is a question designed to invite me to comment on
Prime Minister,
political events. When I told
you don't want to answer it, let me answer it then. So you have 358 MPs. You did think it was 365. You have lost a few. As Mr. Bryant has highlighted, you now have 32 ministers and PPSs who've resigned. It was 28 at the beginning of this meeting, and then an additional PPS who will resign tomorrow if you don't resign. So that makes it 182 if you include her. So half of 358, Prime Minister, just to make the maths simple for you, is 179. It's not looking very good, is it?
Well, Meg, you're wanting me to comment on.
You've lost the confidence of more than half of your party, not including other members in this room who may not be in the 148. I've been generous and not double counted.
Well, sure. I'm here to talk about the government of the country, the policies.
Mr. Prime Minister, without the support of your party, you cannot govern this country responsibly or well. Whatever our political disagreements, I have respect for the office of Prime Minister, but I'm afraid I've completely lost respect for you and your capability to run this.
I think if you look at the actions that we're taking today, the bills that we're getting through, we are doing some fantastic things for the people of this country, and we'll continue to do them. And I appreciate they may not be supported by the Labour Party, Meg, but that's not my problem. That's your
problem. No, the Prime Minister, about competence, not policy.
Darren Jones.
Prime Minister, it's being reported that there's a delegation of your cabinet colleagues waiting in Downing Street, including the Chief Whip, the Transport Secretary, and your new Chancellor, waiting to tell you when you finish here today that it's time for you to go. How will you respond to that?
Darren, you're asking me to comment on
this conversation will happen in a few minutes. Prime Minister.
So you say, but if you want to ask about what we're doing to help people with the cost of living, if you want to ask about what we're doing to build more clean, green energy supply, which this committee has taken an interest in.
That's going to be your answer to the Cabinet colleagues in Downing Street.
Then I'm very happy to talk to you about it, but I'm not going to give a running commentary on political events. We're going to get on with the government of the country.
Prime Minister, on the question of the Prime Minister's advisor on ministerial interests, you've had 2 resignations, not just 1. Why did Sir Alex Allen resign?
Well, Sir Alex has I think been pretty well documented. I thank him too. Was asked to investigate allegations of bullying against the Home Secretary. The team produced quite a long report, which was based on a lot of extensive work, mainly anonymized interviews, and I read it very thoroughly. And the trouble I found with it was that nothing that the Home Secretary had actually said seemed to me to breach the threshold necessary to trigger her resignation. Although you might argue that she should have spoken in a different way from time to time. It didn't seem to me that the allegations wholly stacked up, and I thought that it didn't trigger a resignation. Sir Alex,
that wasn't the reason.
Yes, I'm coming to the reason.
The reason he resigned is because you wouldn't even accept his report.
Well, no. Well, let me put it. Let me say what happened. So Sir Alex took a view that it wasn't that. I read the report and I read the whole thing. He didn't actually write it, but he simply read it and drew some conclusions. I read all the interrogations that had taken place, and it didn't seem to me that, although she might have spoken differently from time to time, it didn't seem to me that she deserved to be fired on the basis of what I read. I read the whole thing. So I made this point. Now, the difficulty was that Sir Alex thought that the ministerial code had been breached, even if in a minor way, and that any breach of the ministerial code necessarily meant a resignation. That view has subsequently been modified by the Committee on Standards in Public Life, who have said that the ministerial that there can be gradations of sanctions for breaches of the ministerial code.
So what you should have done is accepted Sir Alex Allen's report. He would not have resigned.
Well,
it would still be in your gift not to demand the Home Secretary's resignation.
No, but it wasn't.
And the system would have been changed retrospectively as it has done. But you wouldn't even accept his report.
No, Savannah, as I remember, the problem was that in order to, I would have had to accept the Home Secretary's resignation. That was the problem, and that didn't seem to me to, although that didn't seem to me to be a necessary outcome.
I mean, supposing you continue in office, what are the lessons you learn from the appointment of Chris Pincher?
I think the most important lesson is, first of all, don't be less optimistic about people's ability to learn and
perhaps take a bit more interest in it, because it's extraordinary how many things.
And then secondly, and
Prime Minister, perhaps you should just take a bit more interest.
Secondly, when something like this happens, make sure that we do a full timetable of exactly what happened and when it happened, so that when people go out to brief, they've got all the facts at their fingertips.
But it's not a comms failure, this, Prime Minister. It's a proprietary and ethics failure. Isn't the real lesson that if we promote people with the wrong behaviour and attitudes in this place, it will give permission for people to behave in that way, which is why we've got a culture problem in this place.
I think I'd have to put. I think that you're onto. I think what you're saying is very important. And I've given this a lot of thought, and I do think there is a problem with alcohol, and I've always resisted this conclusion in the past, but it sort of feels to me that some people simply can't take their drink, and we need to think about how we work that in Parliament. Now, this particular event took place in in
Didn't take place in Parliament.
But there is also an issue about standards of behaviour, so I additionally accept that I should have been more stringent in my approach, and as I've said earlier, I regret that.
But don't we also need to learn? I take it that Chris Princher is a friend of yours, and that would be perfectly respectable, that we've let him down because we didn't give him the help he needed.
I think that's a very fair point.
What system is there in this place to support people in that position? What do you have in place as a leader of a political party to help people who have behavioural or drink problems?
Well, I think that we all have a duty as colleagues to look after each other and to try to help people, and that's actually one of the functions of the Whip's office.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, Whips have other duties, and they rather conflict with their duty of care. And there needs to be something else to support people who need help, who don't feel that they're giving ammunition to the people who control their careers. So that doesn't work, does it? We've now got another Whip appointed to do the duty of care work. I mean, that's not going to work, is it?
Bernard, what are you proposing?
I'm not going to make policy on the hoof here, but what you've got in place as leader of your party is not working. Would you accept that?
No, I think there are issues about standards of behaviour, and I think I reluctantly come to the conclusion that there is an issue with alcohol.
Well, I mean, you're the last person in the room to accept that there's a problem. Why do you think integrity in public life has become such an issue under your premiership?
Well, I think actually the reality is that I think that people are very, very keen to try to get me off the subjects I want to talk about, and to try to focus on me.
So it's all about you.
No, I don't want to talk about it. I want to talk. I've been trying very hard throughout this session to talk about the things that I care about.
Now, how much consideration are you giving to the prospect of your resignation?
I'm happy to tell you that I'm getting on with the job that I was elected to do, and that is what I'm going to do.
So all these problems are basically somebody else's fault?
No, I think that I think it was.
So who is
one of these people who's left?
Who is responsible? Who should be held accountable?
I am responsible, but I'm also responsible, Bernard, for delivering a huge manifesto commitments that we made in 2019, many of which are now coming through. Hugh asked about what are we doing to make sure that we're taxing electric vehicles properly. There is a colossal body of work that we're engaged on right now. We are uniting and levelling up across the country. We have the biggest program of infrastructure investment that we've had for 100 years. And I'm going to get on with delivering on the program that we set out and on the priorities of the people of this country. And I know that there will be plenty of people who, for whatever motive, want to try to throw me off course by turning it into a story about something entirely different. And I think that it would be a fine thing if we focused on the arguments between us that are about policy and about the agenda and what we actually love doing, which is working hard for our constituents and trying to make their lives better. You know, let's talk. I mean, we've had some interesting exchanges about how to control inflation or motor vehicles. Those are the things that people are interested in, and that's what I'm focused on.
Caroline next.
Bullying and sexual harassment are about a culture of power. Have you just sat there and told us that alcohol is an excuse?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
Is it throwing us off the story by trying to talk about alcohol instead of talking about the culture that has underpinned those behaviours?
Not at all. Not at all. I observe that some people seem to get very drunk, but that in no way minimises the underlying pattern of behaviour.
Well, that's what you've just done.
I don't think.
Prime Minister,
I vehemently disagree with that.
I hope that you will reflect that in the end, we're all dispensable.
Bernard, that is certainly true.
The programmes and the policies of your government and
all flesh is grass.
The welfare of the British people and the security of the nation are indispensable. And if you are becoming an obstruction to the achievement of those aims, I hope you will consider your position.
Of course I will. But I wanted you to know that my job is to get on and deliver on those aims, and that is what I was elected to do.
Will you resign if it is clear that you do not have the confidence of the majority of Conservative MPs?
You're asking me, I love this committee, but you're asking me again to offer commentary today on political events when I'm here to talk about
I wish you to
policy.
be clear about one thing, that if you have lost the confidence of your MPs, you will not seek a dissolution. You will stand aside and allow a leadership election to take place so the Prime Minister may send for an alternative leader. That's the proper procedure, isn't it?
What I'm going to do is get on with.
No, I need you to answer this question.
Where you're quite right, and where I passionately agree.
I need you to answer this question, Prime Minister.
And with you is that I see absolutely
If
no
you have,
need
Prime Minister,
whatever
I'm going to ask you once
an
more.
election.
If you have lost the confidence of your MPs and you're required to step down as leader of the Conservative Party, you will not seek to dissolve Parliament.
I think the last thing this country needs, but I'm not going to step down. And the last thing this country needs, frankly, is election.
Because this House,
on the contrary, I think the risk is that people continue to focus on this type of thing, and I think that is a mistake. What we need to do is get on with stable.
How would it help the crisis in Ukraine and the cost of living crisis if we were plunged into a general election that nobody wants?
But this is your fancy.
Well, then,
I think
then rule it out. Rule it out.
Of course I rule it out.
You've ruled it out.
The earliest date that I can see for a general election is 2 years from now, or 2024, I think is the most likely date for the next election. We have a huge amount to deliver. We're going to get on and do it.
And you'll resign if a vote of confidence in the Conservative Party
I think we're done.
is carried. Otherwise, you're staying.
You're asking me to comment on politics. I think it's important that we get on and deliver on our agenda, and that is what I was elected to do.
Well, I think it's the understanding of this committee. You envisage a general election in 23 or 24, not before.
Well, you said.
And if you've lost the confidence of your own MPs and you cease to be leader of the Conservative Party, you will not plunge this country into an unwanted general election.
I've been very clear with you. I see no
yes or no?
reason whatever for a general election now. On the contrary, what we need is stable government, loving each other as Conservatives, getting on with our priorities. That is what we need to do. Savannah, okay?
I love all my colleagues in the House of Commons.
Fantastic.
Order.
Thank you. Thank you.
Has ended. The proceeding has ended.